All right, I started this one and then realized how nuclear it is. I had one talent in high school, as far as one can judge those things. It was a sensation. I could wing it. I sat in the back in chemistry, thinking not about chemistry, staring out the window. I'm sure I was thinking about a girl or something. Hearing the teacher drone on. It was not his fault, but in the nature of things. If you don't grasp what is being said, it will drone. It's good to register this state. Something is wrong if you are not in touch with a speaker who is addressing you. Something wrong with you are told in high school, or with the teacher, you will later swear. But sometimes it's neither of you. Sometimes you just don't get it. I just didn't get chemistry. And this is always interesting because we wonder why some kids don't do well in school. And I think it's useful for those of us who did do well, which I did do well, miraculously, as you will find out, that those who do well generally and then become successful, quote unquote, very often are people who have an override when they're bored. So they have a way around that. That's very useful. I had that briefly, but it didn't stay. It left me. Anyway, one day I remember very clearly in sophomore chemistry, so I was 14, my last class of one particular day, my mind relaxed. Something penetrated. I walked home. My school was in walking distance in a sort of chemical reverie. I sleepwalked through the rest of that evening. Dinner, teeth brushing, and bed, ignoring my family or my father and his new wife. But I was stupefied with chemical formulas falling into place. Snatches of what the teacher said suddenly clarified themselves. It lasted 2 days. The intensity peaking and waning. The final was coming. I took it and got a B+. Then the next day it was gone. Not completely gone. It will rise again over the years, but one is not revisiting the knowledge of chemistry. One is revisiting the reverie, the groove that I was in at 14 that day, and it repeats relentlessly throughout life. Several days. I'm sure this must happen with all of us in some fashion. I hope so. In my case, I confess it creates several real problems. One is a kind of an addiction to that reverie. It's not laziness. I did think so for a while, but maybe a short attention span, which does suggest it is an unusual faculty. Essay questions on social studies exams were the same. I'd copy the question like you do, a mind a complete void, sit there a moment, and then start, and pages would pour out. I would have said pages of complete nonsense, but in this particular year that I'm remembering, in that particular class, that teacher, the glorious Mr. Metro, was very impressed. Another bullet dodged, and so it goes. It is a grievous source of growing alienation, however, these days. It's why I look into people's faces and they look into mine and we draw a blank. We do not understand each other. It's not so much what our conclusions are, but it's how we got there. It's crying over spilt milk. It really is. What can one do? In arguments with my brother, the American one, mighty fine mind, it is clear he does it differently. He does it more normally, I think. He draws conclusions, he reads a lot, studies, sifts, and comes up with stuff that actually fits his emotional makeup, which we should acknowledge. That is what conclusions do. In other words, truth is not what is real. Truth is what you need to believe. Lots of scoffing occurs, the kind of scoffing that usually connotes stupid dogma, a male framing, a bullying, But it is in fact just a different way of getting there, I have decided. He gets there by attrition. Mine is only by lightning. So when there is no storm, I'm stuck. His is by the midnight oil. One usually disdains the other. Intuition has been cast feminine. That may be as true as anything ever said about such things, but does allow there are at least two ways of thinking, if not many, many more. The dominant way has been male because they have dominated. The midnight oil doth dominate. It carries credentials and medals. It is work well done. One sleeps well over his type of study, after his type of study. When I am in the intuitive grip, there's no sleep. Whole performances have been created on uncomfortable flights to Europe. The jet lag felt more like the weariness that ditch digging brings. And of course, it is more fail-safe, for want of a better term, this masculine way of learning and putting things together. And it creates a sort of a solid fortress. Somebody wrote a couple of years ago that education doesn't change us. What it does is it makes us a better defenders of our bigotries when we entered the room. So we don't learn necessarily to expand, we learn to explain our positions better, which is actually should be celebrated, and we should practice that. Is this the source, I wonder today, of my testiness with the educated among my acquaintances? Yes. It isn't so much probably that they are educated, but how they are educated and why is becoming clearer based on the choice of post-education profession. The why is now money. I thought so in 1972, and it's more so today. It's regrettable. My irritation amounts to a bigotry, but it is a counter to another bigotry, a bigotry that we've gotten so used to. You know, it's the acceptance that Henry VIII is interesting, that because he's an aristocrat, he's really a disagreeable human being, but we've got TV shows and hours and hours and hours of study of this revolting creature because of his class, his position in the world, probably his education too. The bases of my bigotry are three. One, the educated will think nothing of saying that the solution to the world's problems would be more education, better education, except who runs the world? I know what better education means. In fact, it means more and better indoctrination. That's how I have encountered education. The idea that high school graduates, even dropouts, allotted an ever lower rung on the social ladder, stop being curious, stop searching, stop discussing, stop trying to improve what needs improving, stop creating, is just ridiculous. To imagine that going to university triggers curiosity bears examining. Ask people who didn't go to university if they are still curious and still seeking new ways of being alive. They are. You just have to listen. There is an even nastier implication. You'd be better if you thought like I do. Like Democrats, and I'm sure Republicans. The desire that we all think the same, agree, is what it looks like. I say we need exactly less of that indoctrination, more listening to what other versions of reality might say to us, from the wisdom of street sweepers, mystics in the Himalayas, or the very same when Europeans encountered the native peoples of America. We have a tradition of not listening at all. It is a religious tradition, but then religion is the root. The university is a religious creation created by the churches. Very recently, only very recently, we decided to listen to women, and old habits die hard. The evidence of who is running the world that can't wait to destroy itself. The conclusions of the elites are so self-serving and myopic. The problem, they say, today is populism. Well, it's not. You wasted a lot of money on the education that allows you to be that stupid. A part of the problem might be the reaction of us populists to the mess you have made, the attitudes you adopted, and the amount you pay yourselves for your failures. Third, last, and probably the one that makes me now unforgivable, you're boring. A decent attribute in many spheres, no doubt, but when some fundamentals need changing or modifying at least, and a democracy is your creed, you cannot afford it. As the last election showed, your echo chamber is not enough to win. Even the Electoral College, let alone the actual vote. You persuaded no one to change their colors. They heard you in their uneducated fashion, and they responded. The Puritan always gets pissed off that the devil is so alluring. Some of the characters in the Salem witch trials show up elsewhere in history. Hale and Paris were also involved in the prosecution of pirates, and having successfully burned their daily quota at the stake, confided in diaries they were confounded by the hoi polloi's heroizing of the pirate. It tormented them. The plebs seduced by evil. Universities have still not shaken their church roots. It isn't that pirates are sexy, it is that you are not. So now my sister says to me, my wonderful wise sister says to me, well, why don't you give them a chance? Well, what chance have they given anybody else? Is my question. I thought this would all improve over time, that it would become clearer as more and more people learn to read and write and go to high school and come out, and many of them, hopefully more and more and more, are given voice. I think that's a huge missing link in society, is somebody turns to you and says, what do you think? And then they'll try, and they're probably inarticulate. You say, no, try. Just tell me what you think. And it's not the value of the ask, it's the value of the achievement of telling anybody what you actually think, speaking your mind. And it seems to me going forwards that would really be the thing that changes culture, or changes what needs changing in culture, because stuff does need changing, is creating platforms like social media, but creating platforms, and it will be ugly to start off with, but creating platforms where people develop the skills of speaking their minds, getting it off their chests, expressing themselves. It's a huge factor in a person's sense of well-being.